Everything is growing, changing, and evolving, even you. From the baby nurse, the student nurse, the veteran nurse, off the bedside into entrepreneurship. Everything's growing, changing, and evolving, even you. From the student nurse to the baby nurse, the veteran nurse, off the bedside and into entrepreneurship, you have arrived and you have evolved. So, welcome to the Evolve Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Keish, and we're going to get right into the episode. So, hey, y'all, I have missed y'all so much. It has been so much going on, not only in my personal life, but also in the nursing community, y'all. It has been a lot going on in the nursing community. And we're going to get into some of those things here on this episode. So, first and foremost, I'd like to start off if you want to get into the operating room specialty, this episode is for you. Um, I'll start off with how I got into the operating room. I don't know. Really and truly, I have no idea how I got into the OR. So I did an externship. And in that externship, I did do some shadowing in the OR, some externship work in the OR. And previous to that, while I was in my biology program trying to figure out my life, because y'all know I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I knew it was something in healthcare, but I was not sure what I wanted it to be. I ended up shadowing a doctor, and while I was in that operating room, I did not like it at all. It was cold. All I smelled was burnt flesh because they were putting in a stent at the time. Had no idea what a stent was then, but now since I've been in the OR, I know what they were doing. But back then, I wasn't touching anything. I was sitting in one spot, cold, bored, about to fall asleep. Then in my externship, like the activity, like I got a little bit more action in the OR. So I was like, okay, I'm not as cold this time because I'm moving around. So it's not as bad, but I still was like, this is not somewhere I want to land. Although I had several people, encouraging me to go the operating room route, I completely decided I did not want to do it. So what ended up happening was all of you all, if you have listened to me before, you know that I started off in the COVID ICU PCU, strictly COVID unit. And the reason why I left that unit was because I had been seeing too much and I needed to protect my mental health. So I decided to go into a career specialty that required me to not have as much patient interaction. So I wanted to do more patient advocacy without all of the growing attachments with my patients, because one thing about me is whenever you're my patient, I do treat you like family. I make sure that you're taken care of. And so being in that COVID unit and seeing a lot of my patients um pass away, that was very hard for me. So I decided that I was going to go into the operating room. So for my operating room nurses, we have some news coming to you from APRN Beauty. Listen to this. I'm gonna start it from the top.
Today on Nurses in the News, headline reads Retired nurses discuss OR protocol following fatal error at Northwest Florida Hospital. Now, the surgeon, they're saying, did not have the proper training, whatever that means, to be conducting surgery. He was supposed to remove somebody's spleen and remove the liver and called it a spleen. The people in the OR labeled it a spleen, even though they knew that it wasn't a spleen. These two retired nurses, though, get on an interview with the news and blame it on the nurses, saying the nurses should have spoke up. Listen, the surgeon should have not been incompetent. How did is he even really, what is going on now? There's so many frauds in healthcare, we don't know who is who. Because,
Child.
why, and they've been nurses, they said like 40 years at toxic culture. Because why would you take this opportunity to get online and blame that on the nurses? This is nobody's fault but the doctors. But what's the climate like in there? They're saying maybe the staff was afraid to speak up against the surgeon. Let's take a deeper look into it. This is out of Miramar Beach, Florida. Questions have surfaced about the actions of operating room staff during a fatal surgery in Northwest Florida where the wrong organ was removed. Last week, the Florida Surgeon General ordered an emergency license suspension of Dr. Shabnowski. The FDOH report details everything that happened in that operating room when Brian died. It includes statements from operating staff members. What it doesn't say is if any staff shared the concerns outlined with anyone before or during the procedure. Dr. Thomas Shabnowski is accused of removing 70-year-old William Bryan's liver instead of his spleen at Ascension Sacred Heart Emerald Coast Hospital in late August. When two retired OR nurses were interviewed, they said, did they open their mouths? Did they say anything to him? Is it documented that anyone in the room questioned him? I would think if a nurse spoke up or got a supervisor, that would be in the report. The report says OR staff had concerns that Dr. Shabnowski did not have the skill to safely perform this procedure. They
Now, I'm going to pause that right here. And I'm going to talk to you about something about the OR. So, like I said, if this is for the OR nurses, this is for you. And we're going to talk about the culture in the OR. So, if you've seen my TikTok on how I didn't know I was being bullied, but I was really being bullied, but I thought I was tripping, but I wasn't really tripping. In that in that TikTok, it shows how the toxic work environment that the OR has perpetuates violence, right? And it comes from nurse management, it comes from the top, it goes to the surgeons. The surgeons, normally you rarely have issues with anesthesia, but I have no idea why the climate in the OR is the way that it is. And so I have dealt with surgeons who are completely mean. Like if you listen to my old podcast, the Nurse Low podcast, I talk to y'all frequently about surgeons and their blatant disrespect for nurses, because a lot of times they didn't see us as human beings, or maybe they did see us as humans, they just didn't see us as competent, or as competent as they are. It just was a breeding ground for disrespect. And so now you have nurses who eat their young. So you have nurses that are coming in and they're baby nurses and they don't know how to speak up and they don't know what to say, or they're precepting with somebody who doesn't allow them to verbalize when something is wrong. So then you have this consistent hamster wheel of, do I say anything? Do I not say anything? Do I say? But one thing about the OR is you have to have a nursing voice. You have to be that patient's advocate. And as much as you don't want to shake the table or cause ruckus in the OR, or as a Black woman, be the angry Black woman, you have to learn how to communicate the rights and the wrongs of the OR. And so it is extremely hard to do that, especially if you have surgeons who do not listen. So let's get into the two older nurses who tried to place more blame on the nurses than they were on the surgeon. And of course, it's always the question like, why didn't anybody catch it? So I'm going to give you a layout of how the operating room is set up. So we are circulators. What our job is to make sure that everything is taken care of in the operating room, as far as what goes on the field, what goes on with anesthesia, what goes on within the room overall, even down to what the humidity is in the operating room. It is our jobs to make sure that we are operating under safe, we are like the last stop, right? To make sure that the patient is being taken care of in a safe manner. We're there to advocate for our patient and nobody else. So that is the gist of what we do. So this is how we work. So coming in the morning, you make sure that everything in the room is appropriate for the surgery. So you make sure that your scrub tech has everything that they need. You collaborate with them. You collaborate with anesthesia. And then you also are to collaborate with the surgeon. What do you think is going to go wrong with this patient? What is going on with this patient? And you pretty much have all of that in your notes. So you're making sure that you're checking your H&P to see what's going on, to see what the surgery is. If there are any issues with what the consent says versus what the surgery is, you need to make sure that that is corrected before going to surgery. Because I'm going to be 100% honest with you. We are human. Everybody is human. When you're doing your consent forms, there are to be no abbreviations. All words are to be spelled out. The surgery is supposed to be correct with the correct laterality. And it's also supposed to be signed by the surgeon, not in the room. Not in the room. Because some of these surgeons will pull the wool over your eyes and you'll call them and they won't want to come to pre-op and sign off on the consent. And they'll say, we'll just sign it in the room. No, they need to sign it in pre-op. This stops things like what happened in this scenario. Now I'm going to keep it 100% real with y'all. Some people will still roll because they're afraid to challenge the surgeons. Because I'm not gonna lie to y'all, there are surgeons who have very nasty attitudes. There are nurses who can meet them there, and there are nurses who will have nasty attitudes with their coworkers, but will allow the surgeons to do whatever they want to. I don't understand where that comes from. You gotta ask them because I don't get it. But um just making sure that you have everything in place before going to the OR. Then when you do your time out, and I might be all over the place here. But when you do your timeout, you make sure that the room stops. It's silent. Nobody silence, silence. You make sure that nobody is talking, plugging up equipment, picking up stuff in the room, spiking a bag of medication, giving an antibiotic. Everybody is to stop because it prevents things like this scenario. So if I say, hey, this patient is having a lap appy, or this patient is having a IM rod of the right leg, you have to be like, okay, so it's the right leg, it's an IM rod. What's the fire risk for this? Is it high? Is it low? Is it midpoint? That allows you to gauge whether you need to be on the lookout for sparks in the OR. I have heard some horror stories of ORs catching fire. So you have to just make sure that you're doing the best that you can with what you have as an OR nurse. And it's absolutely crazy that we have to prevent all of these things, but all of these things is a part of our job. So let's get into them placing blame on the OR nurse. And as an OR nurse, I have had to, at some point, had to report a surgeon because I felt like what I was seeing going on the field was not appropriate. And I had to verbalize that to my A&M. I had to put it in the STARS report, and I had to make sure that I was being vocal in the case as well. But I'm going to be 100% honest with you. It's not always easy talking to these surgeons, and we aren't the only people that are afraid of them. Now, I'm not afraid of surgeons anymore, but there was a time where I was afraid and I would have to do some breathing techniques and just say what I needed to say as a patient advocate. But if I'm keeping it 100 with y'all, our A&Ms are afraid of the surgeons too. That is why the environment in the OR is so bad, because not only are our A&Ms who we go to report these things are afraid of the surgeons, the directors are also afraid of the surgeons, because if you don't meet their needs, you feel like you lose money. So it all goes back to the financial portion of the operating room. If you have a surgeon who is a big money, like a money pit, they bring in all the money, they're a big ortho surgeon. Not only do they do ortho for us, they're also the ortho person for, say, the Jaguars or something. So you're not only getting people that they have in their clinic, you're also getting the players from the Jaguars. And so now you're looking at this like, if I say anything, he might not want to work here. He may find somewhere else to work, or, you know, I don't really want to say anything. I've seen that time and time again where everybody is afraid of these surgeons, and I'm in the room and I have to stick up for not only myself, but my patient, sometimes my scrub techs, in order for the surgeons to do what they're supposed to do, but also calm down. Because sometimes I've had surgeons who say very racist things in the OR. It is a breeding ground for violence, like I said in the beginning, because you have some surgeons whose egos are so big that they don't know what a level playing field is. Nurses are dispensable to them. Now, they may respect their scrub tech because, you need your tech on your field, they work the field. But a lot of times they do not respect their nurses. And so, as someone who has been placed in situations similar to this, but had to give myself a pat on the back and say, Keisha, regardless of what you have to speak up for this patient, it is hard. Especially like you have to go in with a mindset of, I don't care, I'm human and they're a human being. So if we two human beings, we're going to talk to each other like we're human. And sometimes you have to set precedents for that in the OR because they'll talk to you crazy. And sometimes you're going to have to stand up for yourself because, like I said, your A&M is not going to stand up for you. Your director may not stand up for you. And if you have people in those settings that will stand up for you, you got a good workplace. You have a great workplace because I know that it had gotten so bad at one point at one of my jobs with one of the surgeons that they made them go and take sensitivity training. And that's what you want. You want your facility to be a facility that curates a healthy environment. Now, off the field, you honestly cannot see what's going on the field. Now, the trick to that is use your inline camera. So if you use Striker, then normally the cameras, they have one camera that has a camera in it. They have one light light handle that has a camera inside of it. So just make sure that you're utilizing the light handle cover that can support that and turn it on so that you can see it across the monitors in the room if it's something that is not already on video. So if it's something that's not a lap appy, then you may want to go in and do the camera settings and put it on the screens in the room so that you'll be able to see it. So then you're able to see and look and see what's on going on the field. So that's one of the things that I do in the rooms when I can't see on the field. Because sometimes, you can stand back and you can look and peek, and sometimes there's a gap in where the scrub tech is standing versus the surgeon versus the first assist. But sometimes the whole field is crowded with people. And in those instances, it's time for you to use that camera to your advantage. Now, did they do that? Probably not. A lot of people are ignorant to the fact that number one, that camera is there, and number two, they don't know how to use it. Sometimes they do not know how to use the camera, they don't know how to use the PAC system, they don't know how to use a lot of people in the OR, they don't know how to use the electronic portion of the stuff in the OR. So they just kind of leave that off and they feel like, I don't know what's going on up there, but I'm hoping that it's okay because we're relying on the surgeon to know what he's doing because that's not a part of our scope of practice is to know, like, you are supposed to know your anatomy and physiology, but based on what you're looking at on the field, sometimes you can't directly see from where you're standing what's going on the patient's abdomen. Sometimes you have very tall surgeons who the bed is lifted so high off of the ground that you really can't see. So maybe you need to get a step up to see. There are so many factors in the OR that will prevent you from being able to see the field, and it's going to need really and truly, we need some training. We need a lot of training, especially for our older OR nurses, because a lot of them, they don't really know how to utilize some of the electronic portions in the OR. They don't normally pull somebody else in the OR to set stuff up for them, and never really learning how to do what they need to. Now, the charting portion of things, because the two older OR nurses said that, well, in the report, it should have said, mm-mm. No, the report is never going to say that. If anything, if there is anything that we have learned in nursing school is to document, but you never document that. You never put in your documentation, like, I told the doctor to do X, Y, and Z, but he didn't do it. Now, are there ways to do that? Yes, there are ways to put in your documentation that you saw something, you said something, you're monitoring something. And normally we utilize that on the floor more or less than in the OR. The steps in the OR are you tell your A&M, well, first of all, you speak up in your room, right? The second step is that you tell your A&M. Once you tell your A&M and you've escalated it to someone else, you do a STARS report. Okay? So it might be called different things at different establishments, but a STARS report is a report that goes to risk management to then file it on the back end of things. And they do this because they are trying to protect themselves from lawsuits. So if you are putting in your charting, yeah, I told the surgeon that it looked like he was taking out something, like, but it wasn't the spleen, but it was the liver. And I thought I saw the liver, but um I'm not too sure if it was the liver or the spleen, but I labeled it. um yeah, that is groundwork for a lawsuit. So they like for you to put into your documentation what you saw happen. But here is the kicker for this case. If the nurse knew that they were getting a liver instead of a spleen. So if you got the liver instead of the spleen, that means that your documentation of your specimen is incorrect. And before leaving the room, they have implemented something called debriefing at every facility. Normally it comes in with your timeout. So you have a start, so a prior timeout or a timeout of anesthesia. Normally in that timeout, that's when you're coming into the room. You discuss with anesthesia what the plan for breathing is, or like if they have any. Y'all, it's been so long since I've done done a block. So if you have any anesthetic blocks that you're doing, you will do a timeout for that, as well as like antibiotics that are going to be given. You talk to them about that. But then you go into your timeout in your room, which I already spoke to you all about earlier. And then at the very end of the surgery, you do a debrief. Some surgeons will skip out on this. Y'all have to stop them before they leave the room. So sometimes I'm like, hey, is this a surgery? But they are supposed to lead the debrief. They're supposed to be like, the specimen was a appendix with contents. We had one specimen, but then you have surgeries that have multiple specimens. So you go down the line of what specimens they had, what laterality it was. Did the surgery change? Because sometimes the surgery can change. Depending upon what's on the consent form, it can have a general quote on there, like all other indicated procedures. So they might go in and see something and they've talked to the patient about it and they're like, hey, we might have to open up. So it could be something that's laparoscopic, done like visually with scopes. And then you can have something to be like, oh, hold on, it's perforated. So now we got to open up. So where it started off as being laparoscopic, now it's open. So your consent is going to let you know what you need to do, but things may change. So that's where your debrief comes in. And that's where this nurse probably messed up. Because if you don't really know, and this is me playing devil's advocate in my head. If you don't really know what a liver looks like or a spleen looks like, and you're getting that specimen off the field, and you've already, typed up what the specimen is, you got your label, you've verified it with your scrub tech, you verified what who the patient is. Now you have the specimen, you sit it down, you go on about your way. Now your patient waking up, but they're not waking up. Why isn't your patient waking up? You have no idea, especially if they've already closed this patient up, because you didn't know what your anatomy and physiology was to be able to recognize those things. I'm not going to lie to you. When it's something that's robotic or laparoscopic, it's hard for me to see what the anatomy is when you're inside the body. So I always have to ask the surgeon. Sometimes I'm like curious, hey, so what's going on? Like, what am I seeing on the screen? Some surgeons, they don't like that. I don't care. I don't care because I know that for me, I want to make sure that I'm seeing things appropriately, because sometimes the laterality changes once they go into the abdomen, and you don't know which way is left or right. So it's up to us to be able to detect that, but really and truly it's not us. It's really the surgeon. It's just our duty is to make sure that everything is being safe, and safety requires being questioned. It requires being questioned. But as far as what the older nurses are saying, they're not 100% wrong, and they're not 100% right. Like I said, it's never going to be in the report that this happened. It's always going to be in risk management. It's going to be somewhere where people can't pull it. So basically, it's going to be in a place where if lawyers came, they're not able to obtain that documentation. Now, to cover yourself, make sure you document thoroughly. Just make sure you document thoroughly. As far as the specimen being incorrect, y'all, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I gave y'all my devil's advocate. But I do not know. Like, grateful, so grateful. I'm so grateful that has not happened to me before, but I have had to, like I told you all, I have had to report a surgeon. I felt like this plastic surgery wasn't going the way that it should have went. It was looking botched. It was looking botched. I said, you can't have my girl up there looking like that. You can't have her boobs up there looking like no, 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 no. So what are you doing, my boy? And so then I went to my A&M and I was like, hey, he doing too much. I don't like what it's looking like. What do we need to do? So we ended up like escalating it. And sometimes it's just what you have to do. You have to have a voice for your patient. If you are shy and meek, look, find your voice. Like I kind of found my nursing voice a little bit before I got into the OR, just because I had to speak up for my patients in the COVID unit, where when I used to see doctors that wouldn't even go in the room. They used to just kind of try to stay outside and look at the patient. How are you assessing my patient from the window? You are not assessing my patient from the window. You going into the room. They need you. They need you, point blank period. Like, put the PPE on and get in the room. Like, I didn't get COVID until I came off the COVID unit years later, because I had PPP on. PPP, y'all. Y'all, not the PPP loan. I had my PPE on, and that, like, seeing doctors, and it's as much as people were afraid. We had no choice but to go into these rooms. So y'all can't make us go in the rooms if you're not willing to go into the rooms and assist the patients on your own. So I had to very early get my nursing voice. So yeah. So what is the climate? Child. Hopefully in the years to come, there is some ramifications for the actions that happen in the OR, that people are held accountable for their bullying, whether it's a nurse, whether it's a scrub tech, whether it's a surgeon. Everyone should be treated like they're human beings while being in the OR or anywhere. But it's just more common in the OR that the work environment is toxic. And I don't know how I've been doing it, y'all. Y'all saw my TikTok of me thinking I was crazy. I was thinking I was losing it because this nurse, this my preceptor for when I came into my current job, um, it felt like she was icing me out. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Don't know what's going on. I'm probably just tripping. My hormones are all over the place. I think everybody's out to get me. Am I tripping? No. Recently, because now I'm her charge nurse. So now I'm like, hey, hi, you have to let me know certain things. And child, I spoke to her. She didn't speak back. I spoke again. She didn't speak back. I speak every day. She don't speak back. And I'm like, I'm speaking for HR purposes. You'll never catch me being mean or rude to anybody at work. I just come here to work. I don't come here for nothing else. So for me, myself, and I make sure that I speak to people, that I'm nice to people, even when, because this comes with being professional, y'all. Even when you go through tough situations at work, it is imperative that you remain professional at all times. Not a run over, not a pushover, but professional. So it was a thing. It was a thing where she decided that she was going to write herself off for the next day, which she was well within her rights to because of the time that she was at work, because they have like this stipulation. So she was well within her right to not come in the next day, but she wrote it down and she didn't tell me anything. So my A&M comes in the morning and she's like, "Oh, she's going to be out today?" And I was like, "Yeah, she came in for a 5-minute case. I set up the room for her, did pretty much everything. And she only stayed for like 30 minutes to an hour. And so, yeah, she's not coming in. That's me, question mark. Because I did not know that she had written herself off until I looked. So then I had to like address her and I had to be like, hey, if you are going to take off or anything, you need to let me know. Like you need to verbalize that to me so that I'll know, so that when I'm giving a report, I'm not surprised that you're not coming in. And child, she said okay and rolled her eyes, and it was all right with me as long as you know what I said, and I said what I said. But if I could have rolled her up, I would have. Just being honest with y'all. If I could have written her up, I would have. Yeah. Cause the way that the OR operates, the operating room, it needs to be some checks and balances. Because at the end of the day, like I said, we're all human beings. We all bleed, we all cry, we all laugh. We all have similar life experiences. We all have different life experiences. But at the end of the day, it is up to us to provide safe care to our patients. And how do we do that if we fussing and fighting? How do we provide safe care to our patients if we're not willing to speak to each other? If we're not willing to speak up? If we're not willing to work as a team? The OR is completely teamwork driven. If you are an individual worker, if you thrive best as an individual, the OR is something that's going to be hard for you to adjust to. It might not be the best work style for you. So there you might just need to look for something else. Unless this is a dream of yours, then you need to work on your people skills. But yes, the temperature is hot. It be cold, but the temperature hot. With that being said, to all my OR nurses, I hope that you are not dealing with this. I hope that you are not dealing with the toxicity that comes along with OR. To the family of the patient that this happened to, my condolences to you. I do not wish this on anybody. I hope that this strikes a change in the operating room culture and how they do things, how we do things. But with that being said, this is the end of the episode. If you have listened up to this point, thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section at the Evolved Nurse. You can also email me any cool story times, funny story times, crazy story times to my email, theevolvednurse@gmail.com. If you want to hear it on the podcast. Also, if you want to send me any voice memos, I'm always down to put those on the episode as well. With that being said, thank you so much. And yeah, it's midterms, y'all. Let's go.